We're going to talk about some things, but first we have to tell you good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and high five.
High five! High five!
It's high five time. High five.
High five!
So what are we talking about?
We're going to talk about the giants that are trying to defeat you in your life.
I don't like them.
I don't like them either. And in Numbers chapter 13, there's the whole story about the giants when the children of God spied out the promised land, which, by the way, they were looking for. But then there were most of them who said, yeah, it's a great land, but there's troubles there.
Yeah, great land, but.
Yeah,
yes.
There's limitations. But these two guys, Caleb and Joshua, said, no, it's great. And these giants, these circumstances, they're bread for us. They weren't expecting them to defeat them from obtaining what God promised them.
Exactly. And in our lives, there's times where we think, this is way too big for me. This is way too much for me. I always remember a John Crowder story about his little girl that was about 4 or 5 years old. And there were these big bikers that were coming towards John Crowder's family. And they were looking mean. They were looking like they were going to take him out. They were going to hurt him. And this little 4 or 5 year old girl walked up to them and said, I have more power in my little finger because of Jesus than all of you put together.
That's right.
She didn't know that they were huge and they could attack her. She knew the huge God.
Amen.
In your story, the perspective is what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Because they say that they look like giants,
Yes.
okay, and that they perceive that the giants looked at them like grasshoppers. So it's all
Exactly.
about perception. It's like if you allow something to be a giant, you know what? Maybe it's not even a giant at all compared to the power that we have in Jesus Christ. But if we look at it like a giant, and if we look at ourselves like grasshoppers, even though we're God's children, we have all the blessings and all the strength that God has at our disposal. If we look at ourselves as grasshoppers, well, then that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a matter of perspective.
Yes.
And it very much is a matter of not allowing yourself to be bullied by your circumstances, because the circumstances of life will try to bully you. You'll hear some self-talk in your head that says, no, I don't know, I've done this before, it never works out. And you just can't listen to that. You need to grab a hold of what God has promised, because he's faithful. And if he's promised something, he for sure will bring it to pass. He for sure will bring it to pass.
And we can never continue to just look at our circumstances. Abraham, he's an old dude. His
Yeah,
wife,
very old.
way old.
So
And there's no way they can have kids. But God sees from a different perspective. And he puts that perspective inside Abraham so Abraham could see that. And later on, Sarah could see that.
Yes.
You think about this. Jesus fed the multitude, not once, but twice.
Yes.
Had lots of extra left. And so the first time he did it, amazing. The second time he goes, hey, Philip, look at all these people. And look what little amounts we have. Thinking Philip would go, yeah, let's do it again. And Philip said, okay, send him away so we can have this. He didn't get it. It has to be a change to think like God thinks.
I can think of a great giant story, and that's David and Goliath.
Yep.
David, the little runt that he was and everything, had no business in the natural going against the greatest warrior of the other side, but he had a word from God inside him, and he had the confidence of God inside him, and so he belittled Goliath before he killed him. He talked him down. He said, "I'm gonna cut your head off. I'm gonna,
And you used the right word. He belittled. He made the giant little.
He made him be little.
Yeah,
that's right. But he did all that in his heart. Then he did it out in front of everybody, and that's one of the best giant stories in the world. He even was a giant, but little old David could take care of him in the power of God.
Okay, so since we know about giants, we
Yes.
know about God being way bigger than anything,
Yes.
what should we do with our circumstances that seem overwhelming?
We should not pay attention to them. I think we should regard them as inconsequential or limitations. We should remember what God said.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scriptures about remembering, and God's very much into us remembering what he said. If he has said something, then he will bring it to pass. Your circumstances, no matter what your past has been concerning other circumstances, they don't have to continue to be what life hands you. you can have the promised land.
No matter how intimidating the situation is, I can assure you, God is more intimidating to your enemies than your enemies are to you.
That's right. And I just want to tell you, you're a giant slayer. Go for it and high five.
High five!
High five.
High five, you guys.
High five!
High
High
five,
five.
everybody.
High five.
High five.